She had given him everything. Not in the way people say they gave everything when what they mean is they gave a great deal. In the actual way. The real way. The way where there is nothing left in the pocket because everything that was in the pocket went to the person you loved and you did it willingly and without keeping a ledger because you believed that what you were building together was worth the giving. She had given him 7 years. She had given him her savings when his business was failing. She had given him her belief when his own family had stopped believing. She had given him the specific and total investment of a woman who has decided that this man and this life are worth everything she has and who has delivered on that decision every single day. And he had taken it all and he had looked across the room at a woman with money and connections and the specific kind of surface that money and connections produce, and he had made a choice. He had chosen the surface over the substance. He had left the woman who had built him for the woman who wanted to be attached to what the building had produced. And then life had taken the turn that life takes when people make choices like that. A dark turn. A fast turn. The kind that arrives without announcement and leaves nothing the way it was. And when the turn had completed itself and he was standing in the rubble of everything he had chosen over her, there was only one person in the world who had what he needed to survive it. Stay with me. Because this story is not about what he did. It is about what she chose to do when he came back. Welcome to Bishop Tales, where every week we bring you powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories that stay with you long after the video ends. If you are new here, please subscribe right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from tonight. Are you in Nigeria, Ghana, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, South Africa, Jamaica, or somewhere else in this world? We love knowing where our family is. Now let us begin. Her name was Chisom Nwosu and she was 32 years old and she had loved Tobena Adike for 7 years with the specific completeness of someone who had made a decision and had then lived that decision every single day without the protective reservation that people maintain when they are not fully certain. She had been fully certain about Tobena from the beginning. She had met him at 25 at a business networking event in Enugu where she had been attending in her capacity as a marketing officer at a small telecommunications company, and he had been attending because he had a logistics business that was in its 2nd year and that was surviving rather than thriving, and that he was trying to connect with people who could help it do something other than survive. She had watched him pitch his business to a small group at the event and had noticed 2 things simultaneously. The first was that his idea was sound, that what he was trying to build in the Enugu logistics space addressed a real gap in the market and that the gap was real because she had observed it herself from the perspective of someone whose company used logistics services regularly and was consistently underserved by the available options. The second was that he was not communicating the soundness of what he was building in a way that the people he was pitching to could receive it, that there was a gap between what he understood and what he was able to convey and that the gap was costing him. She had introduced herself afterward. She had told him what she had noticed and she had offered to help him work on the communication problem because she was good at that, at finding the way to say things so that the people who needed to hear them could receive them. He had looked at her with the expression of someone who has been given accurate and useful information by a stranger and is trying to understand what the stranger's motivation is. She had said her motivation was that she thought the idea was worth the effort and that she disliked watching good ideas fail because of communication problems when the communication problems were solvable. He had said he would like her help. She had given him her number. He had called the following morning. They had begun as collaborators and had become something more in the way that people become something more when the collaboration is honest and the honesty allows both people to see each other clearly and what they see is worth seeing. He was sharp and he was funny in the dry and specific way that she found genuinely funny, and he was honest about the difficulty of what he was building in a way that did not ask for her pity but simply stated the facts and kept moving. She had started looking forward to the evenings they spent working on his pitch and his materials with a frequency that told her the thing she was feeling was more than professional investment. He had said one evening, with the directness that she had come to associate with him as one of his defining qualities, that he thought they were becoming something more than colleagues and that he wanted to be honest about that rather than let it develop without anyone naming it. She had said she agreed. He had said good. She had said yes. What followed was 7 years. 7 years of building 2 things simultaneously, his business and their relationship, both of which required the same qualities of patience and honesty and the willingness to keep going when the keeping going was the hardest available option. The logistics business grew in the specific way that businesses grow when the person running them understands the market from the inside and is willing to do the unglamorous work of building something real. By the 3rd year it had 8 employees and 3 major commercial clients. By the 5th year it had 22 employees and was one of the more reliable logistics operators in the Enugu commercial space. By the 7th year it had expanded into Onitsha and was beginning the process of establishing a presence in ABA, the expansion funded partly by reinvested revenue and partly by a bank loan that Chisholm had helped him structure and negotiate because she understood finance in a way that the 7 years of watching a business navigate its financial realities had produced. She had also contributed directly and financially across those 7 years in the periods when the business had consumed its available cash and Tabena's personal runway had compressed to the point where the practical decisions of daily life were becoming difficult. She had done this without keeping a ledger and without referencing what she had given in moments of tension because she had decided she was in this and what she had was available for what it needed to be available for. She had deferred her own career ambitions across 2 of the 7 years, staying in the telecommunications job that was adequate rather than pursuing the opportunities that would have required her to leave Enugu and the business at a critical stage because she had decided her presence was more valuable than the opportunity and she had not doubted the decision. She had been the voice that said keep going on the evenings when he was ready to give up after a client had cancelled or a vehicle had broken down or a driver had walked away at the worst possible time. She had been, in every sense that the word is used seriously, his foundation. The woman's name was Adaora Okafor. She was 38, the daughter of a man who had made significant money in government contracting and who had distributed a portion of that money to his children in the form of both financial capital and the specific social capital of a name that opened doors in certain rooms in the southeast. She was connected and she was polished and she understood the specific language of people who had grown up in the proximity of significant money and who used that language with the fluency of someone for whom it had always been the native tongue. She had encountered Tabena at a Chamber of Commerce event in Enugu at which his business was being featured as one of the more interesting logistics operations of the year, a recognition that had come from the Onitsha expansion and from a profile in a business magazine that had covered the growth story. She had introduced herself with the specific intent of someone who has identified a target and is pursuing it with strategic rather than romantic motivation, though she had understood well how to present strategic motivation in the language of romantic interest when the strategic purpose was served by that presentation. Tabena was not a naive man. He was not a man who was easily fooled by surfaces. But he was a man who had spent 7 years building something in the specific conditions of grinding effort and constrained resources and who had recently arrived at a point of recognition that was the first significant public validation of everything the 7 years had cost, and he was, in ways he had not fully accounted for and was not examining closely, susceptible to the particular form of attention that Adaora represented. She came from the world that his success was beginning to ask him to inhabit. She had connections that could accelerate what he was building. She used language that communicated to him that what he had built was worthy of the world she moved in. He had found all of this more compelling than he would have found it if he had been examining himself more honestly. Chisholm had noticed the change before she fully understood it. She noticed it in the ways that people who love someone and pay attention to them notice things, the slight shifts in his availability, the conversations that ended without the full resolution that their conversations had always arrived at, the events he attended that he mentioned afterward rather than beforehand, the quality of his engagement in their shared evenings that had begun to have a location that was partly somewhere else. She had noticed these things and had assembled them with the honest attention she brought to important information and had arrived at a conclusion she did not want to arrive at. She had asked him directly. He had said she was imagining things. She had said she was not imagining things. She had said she was someone who paid close attention and what she was paying close attention to was telling her that something was different. He had said she was being insecure. She had said she was being observant and that those were not the same thing. The full truth arrived 6 weeks after the first conversation. It arrived through the specific mechanism of a mutual acquaintance who had seen them together at an Onitsha restaurant and who had mentioned it in passing to a person who mentioned it to Chisholm in the way that such information travels through the specific network of people who know each other well enough to assume that relevant information should be shared. Chisholm received the information with the specific composure of someone who has been expecting it and who has prepared for its arrival by deciding in advance that she was going to receive it honestly and not in the managed way of someone who wants the information to be something other than what it is. She called Tabena and told him what she knew and asked him to come and tell her the truth. He came. He sat across from her in the apartment that had been theirs, that she had furnished across 7 years with the accumulated decisions of 2 people building a shared space, and he told her the truth. He said yes. He said it had been happening for 2 months. He said he had not planned it. She said she understood that things did not always arrive through planning. She said what she wanted to know was what it meant. He said Adora had connections that could help the business in ways he had not previously had access to. He said it was complicated. She said she understood that it was complicated. She said she wanted to ask him one question and she needed him to answer it honestly. She asked whether he wanted to be with Adora. He looked at the table. He said he thought he did. She said yes. She said she thought so too. She said then they both knew what this meant. He looked at her. She said she wanted him to leave. He said her name. She said please leave. He left. She sat in the apartment for a long time after the door closed. She did not allow herself the mercy of a managed version of what she was feeling. She felt it fully and completely and with the honest attention she had always brought to things that were real. 7 years was not a small thing. 7 years of choosing someone and investing in someone and building a life that was organized around the belief that the choosing and the investing were right. She sat with the full weight of it and she did not look away from any part of it. When she had sat with it long enough she stood up and she went to the kitchen and she made herself food because she had not eaten and she ate it properly and then she went to sleep because the next day was going to require her to be functional and being functional was what she was going to be. Now friends, I need to stop here because if you are watching this and something in your chest has broken open in the specific way that this kind of story breaks things open, you are exactly where Bishop Tales wants you to be. Please like this video right now and drop a comment below. Tell us, have you ever given everything to someone who chose someone else the moment the choosing became visible to the world? Tell us what you did after. Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it right now because what Chisholm builds after this evening and what happens to Tabena in the years that follow and the moment when he comes back is something that is going to change how you think about love and choices and what people are capable of when they are finally required to face what they have done. She had made a decision that night after she ate and before she went to sleep. The decision was not about Tabena. The decision was about her. She had spent 2 of the 7 years deferring her own career ambitions for the sake of the business and the life they were building, and the deferral had been a choice she had made willingly and did not regret in the sense of wishing she had made a different one. But the deferral was over because what the deferral had been in service of was over, and she was 32 years old and she had specific capabilities and specific knowledge and specific ambitions that had been waiting patiently for the conditions to be right, and the conditions were now exactly as right as they were ever going to get because everything that had been making them not quite right had just walked out the door. She applied for the position at the marketing consultancy in Lagos 3 days after Tabena left. The position had been advertised for 2 months and she had seen it and had not applied because the conditions had not been right, and now they were. She went through 4 rounds of interviews across 2 weeks and she performed in each round with the full weight of 12 years of professional experience and the specific practical knowledge of how small and medium businesses grew and what they needed to communicate to grow that 7 years of watching a logistics business navigate its growth had produced. She received the offer on a Thursday morning. She accepted it before lunch. She moved to Lagos 6 weeks later. She left the apartment, which had been in her name, with the particular efficiency of someone who has decided what comes next and is implementing the decision without unnecessary delay. She arrived in Lagos and she began the new position, and she brought to the beginning of it the same qualities she had always brought to work that deserved her full attention, which was her full attention completely and without the division of focus that the previous 7 years had sometimes required. Within 3 months her manager had noted in an internal review that she was operating at a level above her entry grade. Within 6 months she had led a campaign for a mid-sized client that had produced results that the client had called transformative and that had been used as a case study in the consultancy's new business presentations. Within a year she had been promoted. She did not think about Tabena often. She thought about him in the way that you think about something that was significant and that has been processed and that you have put in the right place, not the place where things that are still doing something to you live, but the place where things that were real and are now finished live, the place of accurate memory rather than active weight. She had thought about what the 7 years had given her and what it had taken, and she had concluded with the honest accounting she brought to important things that the giving and the taking were both real and that one did not cancel the other, and that both of them had produced things in her that were hers regardless of how the relationship had ended. She had the knowledge. She had the experience. She had the specific and durable quality that comes from having been through something difficult and having continued to be yourself through the difficulty. These things were hers. The relationship was finished. The things it had produced in her were permanent. She had heard things about Tabena through the network that connected people who had shared a professional space in Enugu, heard about him in the specific way that such information travels through professional communities where people know the relevant parties. She had heard that the relationship with Adora had proceeded and that the business had benefited initially from the connections she had brought to it, new clients in the government contracting space, introductions to officials whose goodwill was commercially useful, the specific advantages of being associated with a family whose name opened certain doors. She had heard that Tabena and Adora had become publicly visible as a couple in the Enugu social landscape, the events and the photographs and the public presence that such visibility produces. She had heard all of this and had noted it with the neutrality she had developed for information about things that were finished and had moved on. Then she had heard something different. She had heard it initially in fragments, the way serious information sometimes travels when it is bad enough that the people who know it are managing how they share it. The fragments accumulated over 3 weeks into a picture that was clear even before it was fully assembled. The business had run into serious difficulty. Not the ordinary difficulty of a business that is navigating growth or managing a temporary cash flow problem. Serious difficulty of the kind that arrived when the government contracting clients that Adora's connections had brought had become the source of a problem rather than the source of growth. When an investigation into contract irregularities at a ministry had expanded to include the logistics operator that had been handling the ministry's distribution requirements and had found documentation problems in the invoicing that had produced regulatory scrutiny that the business was not equipped to survive. The investigation had moved quickly. The bank had called in the loan. The clients outside the government contracting space had stepped back from an association that had suddenly become legally complicated. The business had collapsed in the way that businesses collapse when the foundation they have been building on turns out to have been built on something that could not hold weight. The full picture arrived in a single phone call from a mutual contact who had known both of them across the 7 years and who called Chisholm not to gossip but because she was one of the few people in the mutual contacts network who was positioned to understand the full dimension of what had happened and because the mutual contact thought Chisholm should know. Tabena had lost the business. He had lost the Onitsha operation. He had lost the ABA expansion. He had lost the 22 employees. He had lost the commercial relationships that had been built across 7 years. He had lost the bank's confidence and the bank's loan facility. He had lost everything that the 7 years had built. And Adora, who had brought the connections that had produced the government contracting clients that had produced the investigation, had departed from the relationship 2 weeks after the investigation became public with the specific efficiency of someone who had calculated that the strategic purpose of the association was no longer being served and who had ended the association accordingly. Chisholm sat with this information in her Lagos apartment on a Wednesday evening and she processed it with the honest attention she brought to everything real. She thought about the business and what it had taken to build it and what it had become and what it had just become instead. She thought about the 22 employees and their families and what the collapse meant for each of them. She thought about Tabena and what he was sitting in right now, in the city where everything he had built for 12 years, the 7 before he met Chisholm and the 7 with her, had collapsed in a period of months. She thought about what she felt about all of this with complete honesty and what she found when she was completely honest was more complicated than she expected. She found grief, not for him or for the relationship but for the business and what the business had represented, the proof that the 7 years of building had been building something real. She found the specific sadness of watching something real be destroyed by something that was not real. She found, underneath everything else, the clear and specific question of what she was going to do with what she was feeling. She did not answer the question that night. She gave herself the time she needed to think about it properly, which was a week. In that week she thought about who she was and what she valued and what the answer to the question said about who she was and what she valued. She thought about the 22 employees and their families. She thought about the specific knowledge she had of the business's actual operations, the knowledge of someone who had been beside the building of it for 7 years and who understood not just the surface of what had been built but the internal structure of it, which parts had been strong and which had needed reinforcement and where the opportunities were that had not yet been fully developed. She thought about what she could do and what doing it would cost her and whether the cost was one she was willing to pay and why. At the end of the week she called Tabena. He answered on the 4th ring with the voice of someone who has been in a state of sustained shock and whose voice has the specific flatness of someone who has been in that state long enough that the flatness has become the baseline. He said her name with the quality of a man who cannot fully account for all the feelings that the name produces and who is not trying to. She said she had heard what had happened. He said yes. She said she was sorry about the employees. He said yes. He said he was sorry about all of it. He said everything. She said she knew. She said she wanted to say something and she needed him to listen to all of it before he responded. He said yes. She said she had spent a week thinking about what she was about to say and she wanted him to understand that what she was saying was coming from a clear and honest place and not from a place of feeling something for him that required her to help him. She said she had processed the end of their relationship with honesty and completeness and that what she was about to offer was not a performance of forgiveness or an attempt to reopen something that had been properly closed. She said she was saying this first because she needed him to understand the basis on which she was making the offer. He said he understood. She said she had knowledge of his business that nobody else in the world had. She had 7 years of intimate understanding of its operations and its client relationships and its financial structure and its actual capabilities. She said the investigation had created a legal and regulatory problem but it had not destroyed the underlying business, which had been a real business doing real work before the government contracting relationships had introduced the complications that had destroyed it. She said she believed the underlying business could be rebuilt. She said she was not in a position to invest capital because her capital was committed to her own plans. But she said she was willing to invest time and knowledge in the form of a 6-month consultancy, working with him on the restructuring of the business if the legal and regulatory matters could be resolved, helping him rebuild the commercial relationships that the crisis had damaged and identify a path back to operational viability. She said she was offering this because of the 22 employees and because of what the business had actually been and because she did not believe that a real thing that had been damaged by something that was not real should be allowed to stay damaged when she had the capacity to help repair it. She said she was not offering it because of anything else. She said did he understand the basis of the offer? He said yes. He said he understood. His voice had changed across the phone call in the specific way that voices change when something arrives that is both more than expected and more than deserved. She said she needed him to be honest with her about something before she committed to the offer. She said she needed to know whether the legal matters were resolvable or whether the investigation had produced findings that made recovery genuinely impossible. He said his lawyer believed the business itself had not been implicated in the contracting irregularities, that the documentation problems had been in the invoicing rather than in the delivery records, that the business had done what it had been contracted to do and had not been party to the contracting irregularities that had triggered the investigation. He said the lawyer believed the regulatory matter was resolvable but that the process would take time and would require someone who understood the operational history of the business to provide evidence of what the business had actually done. She said she could provide that. He said he knew. She said there was one more thing. She said she was making this offer as a consultant and a professional. She said it was not an offer of anything else. She said she needed him to understand this completely and to accept the terms as they were. He said yes. He said he understood completely. He said he accepted the terms. He said one more thing. He said he knew that nothing he could say was sufficient for what he had done and for what the 7 years had been and he was not going to try to make it sufficient. He said he was sorry. He said it with the full weight of a man who has arrived at the complete understanding of what he did and what it cost and who is saying sorry from that place rather than from the place of wanting something from the person he is apologizing to. She said yes. She said she knew. She said she would be in Enugu in 2 weeks and they would begin. She worked with him for 6 months. She brought to the work the full weight of 7 years of knowledge and the specific skills she had developed in the 18 months since she had moved to Lagos and that had sharpened in ways that working on his business directly rather than beside it had not produced. She helped him navigate the regulatory process with documentation that she assembled from the records she had kept across 7 years, records that established clearly what the business had done and how it had been done and what the operational history looked like separate from the contracting irregularities. The regulatory matter was resolved in the 4th month with a finding that cleared the business itself of direct involvement in the irregularities. She helped him rebuild the commercial relationships with the clients who had stepped back, going to each of them directly and providing the evidence of what the regulatory resolution had found and making the case for why the underlying business was worth re-engaging with. 6 of the 8 clients re-engaged. She helped him develop a restructured operational model that was smaller than the peak of what the business had been but that was built on a foundation that was its own rather than dependent on connections whose terms were not transparent. At the end of the 6 months the business was operational again. It had 12 employees rather than 22, the 12 who had been closest to the core operations and who had been willing to return under the restructured terms. It had 6 commercial clients rather than the full range of the peak period but 6 that were stable and that were re-engaging because of the quality of what the business actually did rather than because of any connection. It was not what it had been at its peak. It was real in a way that the peak period had not been entirely real, and realness was the foundation that the peak had been missing and that had contributed to the collapse. She left Enugu at the end of the 6 months and returned to Lagos to her own work and her own life and her own plans that had been developing across the 18 months of building herself in the direction she had chosen when she left. She left the business as she had found it, restored to the condition that its actual quality justified rather than the condition that external connections had inflated it to. She had done what she had said she would do. The doing had been clean and professional and complete, and she had not deviated from the terms she had set at the beginning of the conversation on the phone, and she was satisfied with the doing in the specific way of someone who has done the right thing for the right reasons and who does not require the doing to produce anything beyond the doing itself. Tabena called her 2 weeks after she left. He said the business had taken its first new client since the restructuring, a client who had come through the reputation of what the business did rather than through any connection. He said it was a small client. He said it was the right kind of client. She said yes. She said it was. He said he wanted to say something. She said go ahead. He said he understood now what 7 years had been. He said he had spent 18 months understanding it from the inside of having destroyed it. He said he understood what she had built and what she had given and what he had chosen over it and what the choice had cost everyone including himself. He said he was not saying this to reopen anything. He said he was saying it because he needed her to know that the understanding was real and complete and not the understanding of someone who was in difficulty and needed something. He said he needed her to know that separately from any need. She said she heard him. She said she believed that the understanding was real. She said she was glad he had arrived at it. She said she wanted to say something in return. She said the 7 years had been real and what she had been given willingly, and what she had received from the giving, not from him but from the experience of the giving, was the specific quality that comes from loving something completely and building something seriously and doing both of those things with integrity. She said those things were hers. She said she was grateful for them. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was grateful that she was the kind of person she was. She said she was grateful for the same thing. She said take care of the business. He said yes. He said he would. She said she knew he would. She ended the call. She sat at her desk in her Lagos apartment and she looked at the city outside the window and she thought about 7 years and 18 months and 6 months and everything in between. She thought about what she had given and what she had lost and what she had built and what she had chosen to do when the choice arrived. She thought about the 22 employees and the 12 who had come back and the 6 clients and the first new client who had come through reputation rather than connection. She thought about the difference between a foundation and a surface and what the difference meant over time. She thought about the consultancy and the promotion and the case study and the plans that were developing in directions that she had not been able to develop them when the 7 years had been the organizing principle of her life. She thought about what it meant to be exactly where she was and to have arrived here through exactly what she had been through, and to find, in the honest accounting of it, that she would not revise the route because the route had produced the person and the person was someone she fully recognized as herself. She turned back to her work. There was work to do and she had always been the kind of person who did the work fully. The work was good and it was hers and it was producing things that were real and durable and built on a foundation that was entirely her own. She worked. The city did what cities do around people who have finally arrived at the place they were always going to arrive at. And the woman he had cheated on and left was the most fully herself she had ever been and the most fully in possession of everything the years had built in her and the most completely pointed in the direction of everything that was still ahead. She had lost the man and she had lost the 7 years in the sense that they had ended rather than continued, and she had lost nothing else because everything else the 7 years had produced was hers and was still hers and would always be hers, because the things that are produced in you by the choices you make with integrity are the one category of thing that cannot be taken from you regardless of what the person you made them for does with what you gave them. She had loved him when he was building. She had helped him build. He had chosen someone else when the building was visible. Life had taken the turn. And when it had, she had done the right thing because doing the right thing was who she was and who she had always been, and no one's choices about her were ever going to change who she was, only confirm it, and confirming who you are through difficulty was not losing. It was arriving. She was arrived. If this story reached you tonight, please share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Like this video and subscribe to Bishop Tales for powerful emotional stories every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and tell us this: have you ever helped someone who hurt you because it was the right thing to do and not because of anything they deserved? Tell us what that cost you and what it gave you. Tell us in the comments. We want to hear from you. There are many more stories coming and they go deeper than this one every time. Thank you for watching Bishop Tales. We will see you in the next story.